Welcome in, Loons fans, to another edition of the Matchday Preview. Jonathan Harrison here alongside usual co-host Manny Lagos. Manny, how are you doing this fine Thursday afternoon?
Doing well. Like I said, it's a little bit. I know we're going to go over a lot of stuff, but it's always a fun week after a big win on the road. There's some nice MLS news this week. I'm still buzzing from Vancouver stuff last night. That was impressive.
Yeah,
And I'm incredibly excited about our guest today. It's a little bit of a curveball in a good way.
absolutely. Let's welcome him into the show. Devon Kerr, the first time you've been on the program. People don't know Devon Kerr is one of the analysts for Apple TV. He'll be on the call for this weekend's game between Minnesota United and Sporting Kansas City, so you can listen to him over there on Apple TV. He's also the lead analyst for the USL Championship and NCAA Soccer on CBS, ESPN, and ACC Network. Also co-hosts USL All Access on Sirius XMFC, which our radio broadcast will be on this weekend on Sirius XMFC channel 157, so you can listen to that there as well. But Devon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, boys. Appreciate you and the Loon Nation having me on. Obviously, Manny's the best liar in all the world for saying he's happy to have me. Normally, we run into each other out on the road, and it's nice to actually be kind of around what is the pulse and heartbeat of this team. And I love how he said it's a curveball. I think he was using that as a pun for my name. At least I'm giving him credit for that. So
I don't know if that was planned, but it was really good, Manny. I like that.
Cheers. Thank you.
Let's jump into it. You mentioned Manny.
Clever, but yes, go ahead.
You mentioned it, Manny. The Vancouver Whitecaps pulling off a bit of an upset, knocking Monterrey out of the CONCACAF Champions Cup last night. Vancouver have been easily, for me, I don't know about you guys, easily for me, the surprise of the season early on.
Who are you throwing that to?
That's Manny. Sorry.
Oh,
That's you,
sorry.
Manny.
Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah,
You started the conversation talking about
I think
Vancouver.
after last night, for sure. I mean, before last night, we could have a good debate on maybe Philly being in there too, and Philly has looked amazing in the league. But yeah, I think for the league and a little bit, you got to be excited for a club when they have one of their signature wins in the history of their club. And last night's result, not only the result, although they didn't play at their normal stadium because Shakira had a concert that night, but they got scored on 3 minutes of that game in Mexico. And the night before, Cincinnati and Seattle got worked away. So it was just like, oh, here we go. MLS is going to have a tough start to this competition. And then Vancouver was just the rest of the game. They really were the better team. It was a fair result. If not, actually, they should have won the game outright. It was a little bit shenanigans. I thought, no way a PK at the end of the game. But credit to Vancouver. That was a great result for MLS and a great result for them as a club, a historic win.
Yeah, man, you know what I would add to that? I would also say that, and you'll recognize this for the listeners at home, not only are they doing it, they're doing it without Ryan Gold, right? His knee injury and what is going to be an extended absence for them. Brian White, his call into Nations League, certainly nice for him given the season's last 18 months to get himself back into the mix. And how about Ocampo on the wing? Like, to me, this team continues to evolve, and that's probably the belief aspect is their biggest evolution and the changeover from Sartini, that regardless of what the performance is like, they have the ability within the group to go and chase a result. And all due respect to Vanni Sartini, I loved what they've been able to put out underneath his tenure, but this changeover, I just feel like there's a bit more fire within this group.
Oh, yeah, and I think some of our selfishness is what Sartini gives to the event off the field. He's such a character. It's amazing to watch him. But yeah, there is a steady structure here combined with, like I said, I did not see without Gold that they would still have that kind of creativity. Like you said, Ocampo, Ahmed played great, and they didn't start right. And then bringing him off the bench just elevated everything too.
Yeah.
It was just so impressive. They had another gear team came off the bench. By the way, you just brought up White. I couldn't be happier for, I think, the best American forward in MLS got the call in along with a couple other MLS players. So I think there was only one omission, probably we can talk about a little later, that I didn't like, but I'm so happy he got called in because he has not just this year, but consistently for the last 3 or 4 years, I think he's been one of the better forwards in the league.
Yeah, he's been impressive, as well as that Vancouver side. You mentioned the other results across CONCACAF Champions Cup this week. LAFC losing to Columbus 2-1, but going on through to the next round. Seattle getting worked by Cruz Azul 4-1. They're out of the competition. Cincinnati out of the competition after losing 3-1 to Tigres. Miami and Cavalier FC in action tonight at 7 p.m. down in Jamaica. Looking forward to that one. Going back to the weekend that was in MLS, sticking kind of with Seattle there, 5-2 over LAFC, just putting on an absolute performance. This is kind of the Seattle that we were waiting to see early on this season. Granted, they had to make a ton of changes to their squad to prepare for CONCACAF Champions Cup action midweek, but man, they really took over in that second half, Devin.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for Seattle that most of their fan base gets involved in right away, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to other teams, but there's a precedent that was set in that city a long time ago. And so for a long period of time, if you do not find success from game one, there's a what to do within the city, right? It's you revolt, it's a mutiny, call it whatever you want. They had the year that was the CONCACAF Champions Cup win a couple of seasons back, and I remember being there. Joao Pedro was the one who went down in the midfield in that game, did his ACL, and the season itself domestically turned to CRAP. I think for this team, the expectation of what it could be compared to what it is now is probably the bigger question mark for me. I saw on the rundown most complete team put next to it. And while I could recognize people jumping in on that, I think we are such a far cry from having any sort of conversation. It's one of the things that I dislike the most about punditry and kind of the landscape in the world that we live in. I get it. They're played well. That's a great result against LAFC, including with the result. They're 3-2-2 in all competitions as we're talking right now. They're 500 in MLS play. The 34-game domestic season, that is, we don't really have an idea of what the identity truly of these teams is going to be until we get 12, 15 games in the season. You're right. You can assess of what it's been, what front office moves need to be made, what are you going to do in terms of injury, and that's a question that they're going to have to deal with right now. De La Vega comes out 36 minutes into that result against LAFC. You got Jordan Morris that comes out on the weekend midweek, and Areola in the loss to Cruz Azul. So real quickly, people can say they're playing well, and it's a great result, but on the attacking side, you're looking around with a lot of question marks over the next what could be an extended period of time, depending on what those evaluations are.
Yeah, I love, the funny, when I looked at that rundown, I'm not sure who wrote that in there, but, I coined this Team America, and the real Team America, you guys are going to age myself here. I think in 82 or 83, did not play that well in NASL. So I would say it's exciting to have kind of an America-centric team in this kind of global league now, and especially guys who've proven themselves, although I would say Areola and Ferreira have to reprove themselves pretty big. And then the injury to Morris and Areola now already shows you that we shouldn't get too excited about anything too early in a year because there's so much stuff to come. But I will say, going back to that result, it was a great home win. It's another reminder that Seattle has built a culture of expectations of taking on anybody and doing it. And I think it might be a little bit more in my space of an indictment on the current state of LAFC, if I'm being honest. I think they are lacking an identity. And even our game, where I thought they played well defensively, we were right in it. I thought that was our best performance actually at LAFC, which usually we kind of leave there not being able to breathe a little bit because they're just suffocating. And right now, I think they're allowing teams to play. I think they're allowing teams to stay in games. I think they're missing goal scoring from Giroud, which is just scratching your head. You have one of the best European players of all time that was still scoring in AC Milan when he left. That has, I don't even know, 1 or 2 goals in 24 games, one of the worst forward returns right now in the last 10 years, I think, at MLS. So ultimately, great result for Seattle. It was big in the scoreboard, but I'm looking at more like, LAFC, there's some red flags there.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially after that second half where they gave up a number of goals to Seattle. Manny, you mentioned Giroud there, continues to struggle up top for LAFC. Devin, when you look at LAFC and you watch them and you see how Giroud fits in, or I guess doesn't fit in there, what's going wrong with Giroud and LAFC and how they kind of meshed everything together there?
I love the word that Manny used. Wasn't more of an indictment was the word that he utilized for LAFC, because I'm with him. I think it tells us more about what their current state is, specifically on the attacking side. To me, it's the repetition of players and the frequency, lack thereof, that they've experienced so far. You lose some key pieces. You could say whatever you want about Elie and his age. That guy still controlled a lot within the midfield. I don't care if you replace with the best midfielder in the world. It takes time. to build these bonds going forward, trying to figure out what those patterns are going to be. Defensively, they've been had to absorb a lot more, and I see them hitting the release valve as opposed to trying to find link-up play moving forward. So guys are caught off guard in some of these movements, playing off the back line. The defenders, mentally, you have to stay strong, and when you sit that deep, that long, your initial tendency, you have to fight it. You cannot push that panic button. You got to step on the ball and start to make the opposition work for it, and it feels like a lot more of it has become transitional. It's become separated. I don't anticipate it being a long problem. They're still a very good team. It's just going to take some time for everybody to get on the same page.
Man, would it be so perfect for you, Jonathan, right now to segue into San Jose, Minnesota? How good. I know we got a couple more things to talk about, but I mean, listen, we can put out our chests in Minnesota this week after what he just said there and where we feel our defensive unit is going as a club.
I really do want to get to San Jose, Minnesota, obviously, but there's also a couple more notes that I want to get to in MLS play. Philadelphia 2, New England 0. Couple different stories here off this game. Ty Baribo scoring his 6th goal of the season already through 3 games. What an incredible mark and start for him. But also New England still goalless and winless and pointless through their first 3 games. I don't know which one's the bigger story there. Philadelphia's hot start or New England's just absolute abysmal start, Manny?
I'm going with Philly. I think there's a lot of time to see where New England goes. I don't like to underreact too much for the first 4 games because everything, where you are and what you have to do. And New England's in a huge hole, and they got to figure out how to become a group and a unit and figure out how to get results. So I would probably wait on that one a couple of weeks. But I really do think Philly came out of the shoots probably the opposite of the Loons in terms of this energy, high press, physical. And then you got a forward that, one of my favorite, it's little things, but just that early in the season, the kind of celebrations they're having when they score and he turns and doesn't just go me, goes to his teammates. Like, it's just a cool vibe. Like I said, it has really been 3 games and 3 dominant performances for them.
I would stay on that Philly train and agree with Manny and say that I know you're loving this, Jonathan, by the way, that he and I are just back and forth in agreement. You want the punditry and the fires to have to be put out. I saw him week 1. I've watched every game, but I saw him week 1 in Orlando, and one of the biggest takeaways that I had out of that performance, I get it. I'm with everything on the field, for sure. But it's interesting when you have someone, regardless of the location in the club, longtime tenured goalkeeper, right, an assistant coach, certainly in this case, it's Jim Curtin as the head coach. When you have someone that's ingrained into that culture for such a long period of time, there are personal relationships that come into play. Agree with it or not on how they did business in the front office there, a new face comes in Bradley Carnell. And everything that I got out of that game, as well as my conversations with the players both before and after the match in person, were this is refreshing to us. And it's not that it's a knock on Jim Curtin whatsoever. It's different ideas. It's a different way to play the game. Certainly, there's a different relationship between Ernst Tanner and Bradley Carnell than the fractured one of Jim Curtin before he departed the Philadelphia Union. But the players feel reinvigorated here. And to kind of mimic what Manny was talking about in those celebrations, those aren't manufactured. That's true spirit with a group who feels they're happy, right? It reminds me of kids playing a game where you go and score a goal and just the utter joy of the beautiful game takes over. And fortunately for them, that seems to be replicated in almost every area of the field. Old experience in Daniel Gazdag or young players that are still coming through like a Quinn Sullivan.
Yeah, it is way too early to probably say this, but I want to give some respect and homage to Jim because I think he's built something special there.
Agreed.
And leaving is always weird and tough, but there might be a nice correlation between the Arnie Slot post Klopp going on here with Carnell post Curtin. So, and I hope that's a compliment to Jim because he's built something special. But 3 great games. Like I said, it is a toss-up probably between Philly and Vancouver. You probably want to give a little bit to San Diego, too. What a great start. They've had 2 wins on the road, 7 points. They probably are up there as in that top 3 and maybe number 1 if Vancouver and Philly haven't been so just outstanding. And Vancouver, like I said, probably gets the nod for me right now just because of last night.
You guys mentioned Bradley Carnell. His old squad, St. Louis City, ended the match day with an impressive 3-0 win at LA Galaxy, who continued to struggle this season. What does it say about them? 3 games, no goals allowed through their first 3 games, Devon.
I think everybody looks at Roman Berkey, and rightfully so, and how good he's been, certainly in the game against LA Galaxy, because I think a lot of people look at Galaxy and their poor start worst start from a defending champion in the history of MLS and 3 consecutive losses. It wasn't for lack of trying in that game because they had plenty of chances. Now, other games, we could have a different conversation. There's a ton of injuries there. I'll give Berkey credit, and I'm with all of that. But I think you really have to look at the line in front of him, the change that has been the structural change to where Bradley Carnell, John Hackworth, and the interim, they had a real idea on how they wanted to play, but it bounced back and forth a lot, in my opinion, certainly for my liking. I think there's a different structure at play there. There's a reinstilled belief in Henry Kessler coming over from the Revs, who you drop him back in. People are quick to forget that young collegiate base. There we go back to that development system again. Unit that was Bruce Arena and the New England Revolution just 3 short seasons ago that set the points record, only to be eclipsed by Inter Miami last year. Those are all college kids. That is a college kid out of the University of Virginia that is still commanding this back line. Their organization, to me, has been not impenetrable. It's been perfect. And there's great goalkeeping behind them for sure, but to me, it's all about the defensive shape that they set themselves up for. And then finally, as everybody can figure out, the reciprocation on the attacking end, picking off some goals.
Manny?
Yeah, no, I'm going to cheat and use my indictment word. I'm going to wait a couple of weeks on the St. Louis level because I think they've been great. I think we got a little lucky getting out of San Diego with the point, but I do think Berkey is really, really something to watch right now. It's really interesting because, it's hard to think about building a roster and paying that much money for a goalie. But then you've got this guy who is a Champions League goalie and he's playing like it. He's giving a leadership quality for 3 years, although they did dip last year, that has really started their franchise off in a great way. And he certainly is an amazing one to watch live. And really putting on a great performance for that back line. And like I said, there is something to be said about some of these young American guys who haven't been allowed to develop in college where they become men. And in Europe, they would look like they were old and washed up. But there's the value system where the MLS is, they're really not rookies because college is minor league system. But they do have to get going right away. And again, we'll probably talk about Morris Dugan for us here in a little bit because he had I think 3 great games to start his MLS career, highlighted by this weekend of being outstanding.
Manny knows exactly where I was going next. We've been doing this podcast long enough at this point. He knew I was going to bring up Morris Dugan there. College kid, University of Marshall, has been absolutely outstanding for Minnesota in their first 3 games. We waited long enough here on the Matchday preview. Let's jump right into the review portion of this podcast. Minnesota 1, San Jose 0. Let's get your general thoughts before we jump into the Morris Dugan of this match. General thoughts on this match. I'll start with you, Devon.
I thought the team had to suffer in a different way, which is a good thing, right? You've seen, at least in my humble opinion, 3 very different performances, but there are a lot of similarities on the defensive front. I thought that they had to chase a little bit more in different manners that they did in the LAFC game. I agree with Manny. I feel like from start to finish, in terms of chance creation and the defensive front, that the best performance overall was LA. Now you're looking at 2 ends of the field in compliments. I felt like in tight-knit spaces and the movement that you got out of San Jose, they had to work a lot more within the midfield conversation. So the pivots that we saw in the first 2 games, whether it was a flattened out shape in the midfield 3, if you tried to drop a single 6 down into it, and obviously we're looking at 4 or 5 deep, I thought the execution was better in those runs that we're picking up because there was so much activity level on the front line. This is one of, kind of like St. Louis City, the most organized teams on the defensive side of the picture in MLS for me. Certainly, you're still looking for a compliment on the attacking end, though I think we can dive deeper there. But if you're Eric Ramsey, you walk off the field and go, they threw a lot at us, and we pretty much had an answer for everything.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think to kind of set up for the audience, I got to go to that game live. And I have a history, obviously won a couple championships in San Jose, and it's been a tough, let's be honest, decade for them. And there was some awesome energy in that stadium with Bruce Arena there, with a new roster, with a 2-0 start, which is probably a reality of that. Like at 2-0, most clubs like Seattle, like whatever, wait a little bit. But for San Jose, you could feel the energy of the crowd. And I thought that first 15 minutes, they probably broke lines better than any team we played against so far this year. They were really sharp. Espinoza, Martinez, Bruce allowed Chicho to go wherever he wanted to a little bit. And so I thought they broke some really good lines. And I think after the 15 minutes, we really got sorted where he said, that's enough. And we really, I thought that after the final 75, to me, was a really good group, individual, gritty, and effort defensively. I would even say like almost throughout masterpiece, because yes, second half, they got some dangerous crosses, but we're setting up in this 5-3-2. We're allowing space wide. We're allowing them to think like they have good possession. But each half, they tend to lose balls where we get the better chances, had a couple breakaways in the second half. And if we can get a lead in this system, I feel really good about the group. I really feel really good about how Eric Ramsey is managing at times late to go to a 5-4-1 to limit some of the service to kind of deal with it. And it was just a really fun game live. If you love like a defensive attitude when you get up, that you're going to lock it down. And again, being there live and seeing the guys work the way they did, it was really fun. And they walked off the field proud. And that's not easy for 90 minutes, really 75, if I'm being honest, where we're honed in defensively.
I'm going to say something that may sound insane based off the way this game played out, but this was my favorite performance of the season so far from the Loons. And I know usually people don't equate favorite with a defensive masterclass like we saw on Saturday, but maybe Manny, it's how the Wolves played last year defensively and being one of the best defensive teams in the NBA that has changed my opinion on this. But I really loved watching the Minnesota defense frustrate and hassle the San Jose attack that had been so dangerous the previous two games.
With that, Jonathan, remember Eric Ramsey right away in the press conference afterwards talked about how we can't get away with doing this all the time. We can't get away with 33% possession. We are going to have to evolve. But then he can go back to like, this is a start to make sure. I think there's 2/3 of the teams in the league, maybe more in MLS right now, are scratching their heads about how to get their structure defensively. We're talking about how do we think about different ways to get numbers forward now, or how do we get different ways to get longer spells of possession, or see if Kelvin and Tani can now get us out and get our numbers higher and Bond get forward. So to me, I agree with you. I think if you're there live and you're a Minnesota fan, the group unity of that game and them being like, yeah, some days we might have to play 90 minutes of defense. We're okay with it. I don't think there's a lot of teams in MLS right now that have starting players plus 5 subs that are hungry to come in and do their jobs, even if it's maybe not exactly how they want to do their job that day.
Jonathan, also recognize, by the way, that, and I'm sure Manny can attest to this as well, given the lineage that he's provided this country for such a long period of time, is that, at least for me, there is a common misconception in this country that having the ball makes you better, number one, and that bigger is always better, that you have to have the ball, that you have to be the aggressor. Understanding that with the youth of MLS also comes in experience on the tactical side, and being fortunate enough that so many of these great coaches from abroad are coming here, but also the evolution of our domestic coaches and recognizing that their tactics don't have to be ball dominant. It doesn't have to be a team that puts up 60, 70 goals in a season. They can be defensively sound. They can suffer through moments. And if they're maintaining their identity and they're true to what they want to be, who cares, right? It's not necessarily what you do. It's how you go about doing it. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I have for this Minnesota team that started last year, to be fair, but that also fans are starting to recognize, yourself included, where you can go, hey, you guys have it. We're going to do what we want to do, and we'll be just fine.
Yeah, when you talk about the possession, that was one of the things that we talked about last week on the show, was both of these two teams came in as the teams with the lowest possession amount throughout the first 2 games. Now, obviously, one of those teams had to give in this game because of the way they set up, and it was obviously San Jose had to, or was forced to have all the possession in this match with the way Minnesota set up. When you look at that, Devon, how did that change how San Jose played in this match? Having to go from a team that didn't have a whole lot of possession the first 2 games to having a majority, I mean, what was it, 66% of it, 67% of it throughout this match? How does that change how you play in a match compared to what you become used to in the first couple games?
You want me to reference San Jose specifically, or what the matchup would be against Minnesota specifically?
Well, in this match specifically, I mean, we can get into the broader topics of it later on.
So Manny touched on some of it, right? Like, Chicho has always been the type of person where you have to let him have confidence and go get freedom. Certainly, to me, the reins were taken off a little bit further. Mm-hmm. I think it caused an issue with their system at times where they didn't have the point man up top. If Amal Pellegrino had dropped into the pocket a little bit and Chicho had gone, there wasn't enough of a representation up high. They weren't consistent on the wings. You can also benefit from those type of things. But to your point, when you go 2 games in at this point in time, and you found repetition and success in certain areas, your natural tendency is to go back to it. When that success doesn't follow, okay, you're usually going to have a plan B or a plan C. A lot of times that's put into your game model within the training sessions that week. You're not always going 4 or 5 deep. Well, that's when you have to take those pillars that are put forth by the managers, and you have to start to evolve yourself within a group. This is something that Minnesota United is going to experience throughout, the opening portion of the season on the attacking end, and we'll get there. But if you're given a game plan for something, now you have to change. I thought the team needed to go a little bit quicker with the space that they were given. One of the things that Minnesota United did and also does in their games is for large portions of the game, they not only sit and they drop their 5 deep, they're also willing to give you about 60 to 70 yards out possession out on the width. How do you take advantage of that? You have to have rotation coming out of the midfield to create combinations that are overloads. If that doesn't get there quick enough, Minnesota's midfield rotates over, then you have to play in behind. You have to have quick switches. None of this, to me, really matriculated onto the field to play for San Jose, at least not consistently.
Yeah, I think the word there is consistent. I do want to give San Jose a little bit of I thought, Espinosa was really dangerous. I got a chance to talk to Eric a little bit after the game. He was really impressed. And one of the things about Espinosa, he's been in the MLS for a couple of years now, several years now. He puts it on the line every game. He's running up and down that wing. He's serving dangerous crosses. I thought Joseph had some nice spells. If you watched him live, there was a few moments where I was like, oh, I remember 17 and 18 Joseph a little bit. He'd been dangerous, but it really, I think you make a great point where we really never panicked, and we really had a great time where once we kind of stopped them breaking lines, they kind of ran out of ideas. So I'm extending about how you just said that, they didn't really have a plan B, which it's very early in the season. And again, they got up to 2-0, and they've been up in every game. And like I said, I think the first goal was such a key for us. It would have been totally different for Eric to have managed this game if we had got scored on first, because we haven't quite been showing our offensive kind of wherewithal of trying to find adversity of dealing with a game when you're down a goal. And the one time we did was late in the LAFC game. We weren't great at it. We got scored in the 78th minute. Those last 12 minutes weren't as fluid as try to see if we could get the tie as we wanted, although I think we deserved the tie that day. But when we got scored on, it was a little tough for us to get a flow of momentum offensively. So it was a fun day, though. Like you said, though, I think if you're a Minnesota fan and you're looking at the group and you're looking at certain individual players, or we don't know where Maurice Dugan's going, wow, outstanding. Romero got minutes, outstanding. We got this young kid, our young French kid got in the game and helped saw the game out. Owen, it was nice to see that. I thought Trapp and Dotson were great. I thought it was Load starting for 90 minutes. Great job. So it was a fun day to kind of get all these different elements. I can't really think of any quote unquote poor performances. I don't think anybody was unbelievable. I would talk about Boxall, Dugan. I think we're probably my man of the matches. Maybe I'd throw Bongi in there. That was the first game where I thought Bongi showed a little bit of getting forward, but also was locked down defensively on Ricketts, who I thought he's a danger. He's quick. So, again, fun day. Like I said, guys, being there live and seeing the group kind of walk up the field 3 points and the way we did it, it doesn't always happen that way. So it was a fun one, and it sets up, I think, some nice energy for this tough place in Kansas City.
Looking to get more bang for your buck? With the 2025 Flex Pack, you can choose between 5 and 16 home games to attend for the season. Pick your matches, grab your seats, and dodge those individual ticket fees. Your plan, your way. More information at MNUFC.com. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Maurice Dugan there, and we briefly mentioned him earlier. College kid from Marshall, draft pick last year, played a couple games before going out on loan to Rhode Island. Another impressive performance, his third start of the season for the Loons. I think FBref had him at 16 clearances, now continues to lead the league in that. 16 clearances in the game on Saturday alone. When you look at his transition from college into the pro game, Devon, what has been the aspect that has improved from Maurice Dugan over the past couple of years, as he's, I guess, turned into, you kind of have to pencil him in as a starter now for the Loons on that back line.
And real quick, Devin, I don't know, we loaned him to Rhode Island, so you might have called a couple of his games. They went on their run to the championship.
Had him a ton in college, too, and I'm pretty sure Eric Ramsey's got a Sharpie in his hand for him right now, by the way, as opposed to a pencil. But seeing him under Chris Grassi, seeing him then come into the league, both at MLS Next Pro and a brief with Minnesota before going out on loan. When I look at him this year, I see a tremendous uptick in two areas. Number one is timing. One of the things as a center back that you have to be so careful of is, A, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And now there are a wide variety of aspects that you could challenge when I make that statement, but one is your athleticism at the college level compared to USL, compared to MLS. It translates in the sense of you're athletic, but when you get higher, so is everybody else. So there are times where you can be a little bit lethargic in your first step because you can still get there, or you're trying to lure a player in, trying to submit them to pressure so that you can play in behind them. You don't have the ability to do that in MLS, and I think Morris has done a really good job with his timing aspect. Also, when you combine timing with communication, again, going from Marshall to Rhode Island, he was much more of an aggressor, a guy who had a commanding presence on the back line. I see that character evolving, but next to Micah Boxall, you got to be willing to take direction. And if you watch the way that the back line moves together, that three is in perfect synchronicity almost every single time. The plays that he is moving when he's working into clearances and stuff, I actually think it's a little bit more impressive to me because I don't think Marcanic has been. I don't think he's been perfect on the left side. I think Morris has had to cover a lot more over there. So communication and timing, all great assets to have in your back pocket, but certainly with his reps that have come at the pro level over the past season on loan or with Minnesota United, to me, it's even more so impressive.
Yeah, I think you've just think of that block in the first half that he had on Martinez. That probably would have been a for sure goal. I think about the late heading he and Boxall, particularly him, though, on that far post, you have 3 or 4 guys hanging on you. You're still getting that head on that to clear it and make sure it gets out of a dangerous area. Outstanding. Again, I mean, it is a nice historic time. I don't even know the data, but we only had 1 shot on goal in 2 games. And San Jose, I think, got in the box way less times than you are when you watch that game. It should have been they were in the box. They should have been in the box all the time. We should have been never in the box. So the reality is we actually were in the box a lot more than them, and they could get there. But I just think those moments, it was really impressive for somebody who's in their 3rd MLS start. And the evolution from what I saw last year to this year is through the roof.
Yeah, you talk about the timing. I mean, Manny, you mentioned a couple moments San Jose game. There's a couple from the Montreal game where I remember from our broadcast booth right above the Wonderwall. I can remember a couple times where he had to step in and make a nice interception, a timely interception to stop a Montreal attack. And he's just been so impressive this season, along with that defense. Manny, you mentioned the allowed shots on goal. I think there was a 200-minute streak where the Loons didn't allow a shot on goal dating back to the 83rd minute against LAFC. This defense has been absolutely outstanding for the Loons this season. When we talk about how this defense has evolved and really gelled together this season, what's the next step in this evolution of the Loon squad that you would like to see, that you potentially want to see out of them, Devon?
I would start with your wingbacks, right? Because the team does sit. There's not really a heavy committal from either one of the wingbacks. Now, let's remove injury, player status for a second here. If you're just looking at the positional aptitude within the system, the lack of, we'll say, opportunities up top has a little bit to do with an unwillingness to commit numbers coming forward from those outside backs. It's kind of a tit for tat, though, right? You're tempting fate. You come a little bit more, you progress a little bit higher, you're opening up space in behind. Certainly, as the experience level and the camaraderie goes from that back 3, when you move away from them, so will the confidence factor, where they'll be able to close those spaces down. Within these clean systems that you get out of Minnesota United, one of the things that I love the most compared to last year, and this is a small window that we're talking about, the Minnesota United team that finished last year compared to the start of this season, I've loved their limiting of opportunities in transition. And that comes with their steadfast outside back play. So I can sit here and say, I'd like to see them be a little bit more aggressive there because it's going to alleviate some of the pressure up top. They're one of the best in the business from what I've seen so far in 3 humble games this year on the repress, and not just on the repress with intensity, but having numbers and support to then be able to provide themselves options. But it is limited. So to me, you have to find a way to evolve there. I think the immediate answer comes from outside back play. But again, you have to be very careful about how you attack that. Just like recognizing the right moments on the back line for a Boxall, for a Duggan to step in and go make those plays. They're also going to have to recognize when those guys release where the coverage is going to come from, because as you step a little bit more space opens up, and if it breaks down, you could easily get yourself into trouble.
Manny?
Yeah, I think he's spot on. I think I think what I see is, I think modern soccer, there's no one system you should be ready to play your whole year. I think you got to be ready to evolve. And I think even right now, if we're talking about back five, it means that eventually we hopefully can get this to a back three and we have numbers higher up, but everybody's higher up. And so again, a little bit like how you watch Liverpool this year, where they're so good at deciding, we'll sit deep or we'll sit high and have the same kind of system. I think that's one way to look at it, where essentially if our wing backs, we can decide we're going to press repass. We're almost like a 3-2-1-4, ideally, where our wing backs now are our wing forwards, essentially. So I think there could be some evolution there. That's going to take a lot. Well, it's going to take a lot of quality. Do we have the quality of players to do it? Not sure we do now, but we have got a lot of room to grow. And we also have a lot of room in the window to think about those areas if we want to play that way. I would also say we will evolve some of our systems. There's no doubt in my mind. I love the experiment of playing Tani and Kelvin up top. And by the way, we should talk about Kelvin's on a tear, scoring goals for us, which really helps in this system when you got this 5-3-2, that you've got a player that is just on fire scoring, because it allows you to think about, we might score the first goal a lot, and then we're closing shot. So I would say, to me, the evolution here is unknown, but I'm excited about it. And I'm also excited about it. I think we have a coaching staff that's not afraid, whether it's within a game or within a year, to use multiple systems with multiple players and think about all this stuff. So I think we're in a good point where, there's a lot of growth that has to happen. And I think my favorite thing was that Eric said, yeah, I loved it, but we're not going to be able to get away with this week in and week out.
We can't end this conversation about this game without talking about Kelvin Yeboah's goal, his second of the season. The ball's kind of just bouncing around, and Michael Boxall sends it in. Of course, you expect Michael Boxall to be the one on the assist of a Kelvin Yeboah goal, but Kelvin Yeboah, kind of with his back to the goal, takes a chop at it and sends it to the far post. As you said, Manny, this guy is just a striker in form, and being able to kind of score those kind of goals where you don't have the clearest vision of goal and just find the back of the net, that just proves he's got the feeling for the goal right now.
Yeah, and I sometimes, I know I get on this show, I try to educate a little bit. I want to say, there's little things that happen in games that 99 times out of 100 don't mean anything. When the San Jose defender, I can't remember if it was Romney or who was, but just not clearing that ball appropriately and allowing us to get numbers up and forward and have our center back stay forward because there's still danger, really was what caused that goal. And again, I only bring that up because 99 out of 100, that defender clears that ball another 20, 30 yards, and our center backs have to run back. So there was a huge mistake on the San Jose player, which, again, I think as we grow into the sport and learning about it, they seem innocuous, but they're massive. It allowed Boxall to stay up. It allowed our system there to get fight and battle for second balls. And it was a nice little service by Boxall. And Calvin's just on fire. I mean, he just saw the play. And not only that, but he saw it wasn't about how hard he hit it. It was like, I just have to beat this guy to the ball, and now the goalie will be in trouble. So it was a really fun goal. It was nice to see Boxall get assist. I thought it was a big mistake by the San Jose defender to allow us to keep numbers up.
Devon, when you look at from the outside, and you've been looking at the tape on this team getting ready for the game this weekend, the big talking point in the attack, at least, has been this two-striker system between Yeboah and Tani Lachey. From the outside, what's been your analysis of how these two have gelled up top and how they've kind of formed a forward pair?
Certainly, and again, I hate going back to the defensive side, but it certainly has been the most talked about item coming out of Minnesota United. The way that, and I think you've seen a big change in just 3 games, the way that the team goes about their business and how they want to apply pressure. I think people hear the word pressure and they misconstrue with pressing, and those are 2 very different things because of the stability that's behind them. The way that they play off of each other, how they're challenging the center backs when the ball movement's coming from one side to the other, if it's coming centrally, it's also allowed the midfield behind them to start to apply their trade a bit differently. So you saw a very, very flat shape week 1. And that flat shape struggled a little bit, to be fair. That wasn't the case in week 2 and week 3. So their willingness on turnovers, on balls coming off of a goal kick, certainly on just continued possession up high, I think their willingness to work off of each other is why the defensive structure to start is so good behind them. Everybody looks at goalkeepers and shutouts, and most managers will be quick to tell you have to look up top and where that pressure starts before you can just pinpoint one person. I personally have felt there's a lot left to be desired on the attacking side. We can discuss wingbacks. We can talk about the midfielders and creation, what the right pairings are going to be within there. But the two of them, I find on some of these pickups, on some of these turnovers, seem to be a bit more separated than I would like. Now, the other side behind that is you've got two players in a profile that can actually check a lot of the same boxes. So when you talk about speed in behind, you don't want them in the same place. You want them to be able to play off of each other. If Yeboah comes down into the pocket, you need that representation up high. And I think that they do that. There's just a little bit more for me seeing Tanny for a couple of years, both at MLS and USL championship level, and certainly what we've seen from Kelvin Yeboah. I feel like the level of comfort there and confidence needs to grow within them, because if they can learn to play off of each other, that opens up more space for everybody else. You constrict the back line. That gives you more space out on the width, and certainly the distribution. That really isn't an issue to me when given the right amount of time out on the width.
For sure. Now, before we close out the show.
Well said. I mean, I think that is a conundrum for Eric to see if he can get the best out of these two players that probably even more last year. Devin, I don't know if you watched a lot of our games. We're probably way too late for him. And so I think that's a little bit of Eric's goal this year, is to see if he can get them really coordinated. Let's go back to the what's the old Manchester United York and
York and Cole. Manny Cole. Yeah, man.
That's what we want. Up, back, and through. Let's go.
Bingo. Yeah.
Love it. Coming up this weekend, as we move on to the preview section of the show, Minnesota traveled down to Sporting Kansas City, a Sporting Kansas City side that have struggled this season, have struggled a lot lately. 10 losses in a row dating back to last season, 5-for-5 losses, including Champions Cup action this season. This is a very different Sporting Kansas City side than I think we've ever seen under Peter Vermees. When we look at it from the outside, what's been going wrong for Sporting Kansas City, Devin? Besides just obviously going with everything.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're piping this audio right into Peter's office right now, so he can chastise me once I get there. Look, you say what's wrong. I'll happily answer that. I think people also need to focus on what's right. I think we live in a society that focuses on the negatives, and I think there are a lot of positives to come out of the team. If you look at the negatives, there's a ton of inexperience together. There are a lot of leaders that departed this team, not just in the offseason, but over the last 24 months. Certainly losing Tim Mealy in goal, regardless of how you feel about the talents that is John Paulskamp in goal. That is a generational player within a league, and certainly a legend for the team. That's going to hit the locker room hard, not just on the field of play. Andreu Fontos on the back line, Johnny Russell outside, Remy Voltaire in the engine room. So even if you replace them with capable components, the ability to understand everybody's subtle nuances, and even the big ones, don't come right away. Now, a benefit for them would be the fact that they did get some action in CONCACAF Champions Cup. The bad part of that is they've already been dismissed from it. And a lot of the guys that they were able to get into action, they came so late into camp that they haven't been able to get them up to game speed. That's why you see so much rotation at the center back position. That's why you're seeing a lot of movement within the midfield as well. I think you focus on the positives here, though, too, because you still have Eric Tommy, which for me, given the right pieces around him, is an extremely dynamic player that I think is the most interesting piece on the attacking side, how it matches up against Minnesota within the game. You've got good wing play, and Sulejmanov, who's trying to figure it out. Joveljic is coming off of an absolute monstrous season, and I think he was a steal at $4 million cash to bring him over, right? It's one of the new rules that you're able to do and go get players in cash within MLS play. And now they're just trying to put all of those pieces together. They got to get people healthy. They got to gain confidence. Friendly reminder for everybody, though it hasn't been the combination that everybody wanted over the past couple of seasons, 4 years now where they're slow out of the gates. 2 out of the last 3, they ended up as one of the hottest teams entering postseason play in MLS in 2023, took the Western Conference and MLS by storm and made a nice little run, and last year got themselves to an Open Cup final. This team seems to find a way to eventually get it right. The concern for Sporting fans is going to be how long is it going to take them to get there?
Manny?
Oh, I just throw on top. The start of this is we're talking about Minnesota United going to Kansas City. If there's anything except for us being prepared for a tough place to get a result and a tough place for us to understand that we have a ton of respect for what they've built and what they've done there. I know Eric Ramsey really well. I think in a weird way, it'll be really cool where he's playing against, last week and now this week, two of the most historic coaches in the history of the game. It's and particularly where it's fascinating for me is just knowing how hard it is for us, particularly to get a result there. And the fact that they started 0-3, I kind of mentioned I don't like try to over analyze or overvalue the wins and losses this early in the season, but I do know I'm excited for an amazing game because we've got a team that's hungry to get points on the board to get off in this MLS season. And so they're going to be, in a way, desperate, but desperate means hungry. Desperate means they've got to find a result. And we've got to think about how are we going to deal with our own adversity against kind of a hungry team that's looking for a result to get going in the season. So it's a great opportunity for us to kind of deal, I think, early season with a team that might have a little more hunger than usual for your fourth game into the year. And that's exciting because I'm excited to see how our guys deal with it. I'm excited like how our guys deal with a place that we haven't had a lot of success. We had a little taste of it last year, late in the season when, if you remember that game last year, we weren't playing that well until the weather break. And we had about a 2-hour break. And then we kind of, got our first, I think that's our first ever regular season result. So to me, that's going to be a fun, fascinating game this weekend. Like I said, and then individually, I think they're right. They got a backup goalie who now is saying, hey, you're taking the reins. Tomney has been sharp and looks good. It just looks like they're still taking some time to get where they're going. And it's a great time for us to play them, by the way. No doubt about it. I couldn't be more excited to be playing a team that they're still having to think about a lot of little things, where we get to go down there and say, hey, how are we going to deal with this team that's hungry for a result?
For sure. And you mentioned, Devon, Jovalic coming over from LA Galaxy, 15 goals last season for the Galaxy in their run to the title. A big move, one of the first, if not the first, I believe, of the new cash transfer swapping. How does he fit into how they play, and how has he fit in so far from what you've seen into that attack? Because that's a guy who obviously had a ton of really good, really big talent around him in LA. Comes to Sporting Kansas City, where, as you said, they've seen a lot of their leaders, a lot of their ingrained players there kind of leave over the past 2 years. How does he fit into what they're doing and what Peter Vermes is asking him to do?
In terms of the system, he should fit in perfect. He hasn't fit in perfect so far.
Yeah, just one goal through the 3 games.
Yeah, again, to echo Manny's thoughts here, 270 minutes in MLS play. That's what we're talking about right now. Yeah. It's fun to break a game down. It's fun to talk about what we've seen. By no means is this any measure of what the season is going to be for anyone, right? If you take a look at the first 3 games, I'll include for them CONCACAF Champions Cup. It has been less than desirable because of the connection points or lack thereof. You have a player, I'll take the system actually. You have a system in Sporting Kansas City that historically, whether they drop 2 into the engine room in the midfield or they want to operate with a single pivot in the 6th, they like their wingers to get high and they want them to challenge. We haven't seen that enough. Instead, it's been a lot of long balls hit with desperation where you're getting guys chasing and they just don't have the same sort of support. Jovalic, to me, is the perfect player within this system because he has the pace to be able to get up to speed on some of those long balls. More importantly for me, with the quality that Peter Vermes can put on the field with his system centrally, you're going to give the ability for that front line, the front 3, to remain high, to get pressure on whomever the opponent may be and pin them back a little bit. But also Jovalic drops in. Now all of a sudden, we're not having a conversation about a 3-man midfield. You can box that with 4 because you can play into his feet. You can turn it into a diamond. They've allowed their outside back and Jake Davis during his tenure at right back. He's moved out of the midfield. Well, now the out of right back, they jump him up in. So what looks to be a very simple 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3 quickly becomes a 5 or even 6-man conversation in the midfield. That's hard, right? We talk about tendencies. That's not easy to pick those types of things up. It's also not easy to learn them when you haven't played next to the person next to you for a long period of time. And say whatever you want for people at home. These guys get paid to do this. They go and train together. Yeah, I can promise you this. In the heat of the moment, when emotion is on the line, when the game is up against your backs and you're down a goal, it's very difficult to think about everything that has gone on in training in such a short window. This is about a much bigger picture and trying to lay out a runway that eventually gets you success. The hope is the same hope that Eric Ramsey verbaled about Yeboah, is that you're getting 15-plus goals out of this guy. He still has that type of capability. There's no doubt in my mind.
Manny?
I just love the assessment because, obviously this is a pro Minnesota podcast, and I just go to there's a possibility. I don't think the same way that it might play out like San Jose for us, just because they can go forward and they can get numbers forward. But the question mark for me will be what happens if we stop them and we have the ability to stop them in good spaces now. And can that back four deal with our counterattack? Can they deal with the good numbers and good spots? And that's why I'm not overanalyzing. They're still growing into what they're going to be attacking and defending. But I am excited about that. I'm excited about, if we do kind of solve some problems with them going forward, these guys, they could get opened up pretty quickly. Like I said, it's a tough balance for them to how quickly do they want to try to get 3 points this weekend versus make sure they get a point and get on the board. Or frankly, if we can actually possess the ball a bit, maybe we kind of flip the script. We'll see. But I'm excited because I do think they have to think about it more than us right now. And that could be good or bad. I do think there's a little bit more desperation when you haven't gotten points in the league yet, and you have to think about how you're going to get them. I do predict a very physical game for you to call this weekend, by the way. I predict some controversy because of that. I predict some tough refereeing going on. I also think Agata and Shallowy will have to make an impact off the bench to raise their level if it is a tight game for them to get the result. I don't know for our fan base too. Is Mason Toye injured? Is he on the bench? Is he healthy? He's on the roster now, right, Jonathan? Now, Mason Toye.
Yeah, he's on the roster, but he hasn't played yet.
So for Minnesota fans, he's somebody that he's moved around a little bit. So yeah, long story short, I'm really looking forward to seeing how we handle the adversity because I do think they'll throw some punches again, like San Jose. And if we do the same, if we deal with the same way we did this last week, I'm really excited. Because then
John,
I think really opened up.
It's funny, by the way, because I alluded to it earlier. Manny just talked about it a little bit, right? The evolution of teams. I mentioned Eric Tommy earlier. I'm not one to usually isolate a single player. It's one of the things that I dislike the most when you get into an opener, you add halftime, and you just hone in on one player because the chessboard is so big and one piece, how it impacts the next. I love Eric Tommy in this game because of how it affects both sides of the field. It's not about what Eric Tommy can do going forward. Because of the freedom that Peter Vermedes is going to give him, probably isolated on that left-hand side and the way he comes into the half space. Well, now you're talking about a conversation of, okay, if Eric Tommy comes in, how much does Bongi Hlongwani release, right? Does he start to be a little bit more aggressive, come up high? If he does, now you're looking at the right side of the back line for Minnesota that has seen some rotation. How do they pivot over into that? If Tommy stays wide, well, now you're having a very similar conversation about Minnesota staying deep once again. So it goes back to the relationship up top and how you release. It's one player, yes, in terms of a name and who I give you, but it's something that I like to hone in on just because it affects such a wide variety of areas for both teams, right? Those are the types of matchups that you get in this game because of rotations and how early it is, that the inconsistency provides that flame to the fire, if you will, that can just add a little bit more.
Your answer to this last question here on this match may be kind of along those similar lines. Minnesota comes out of this game with all 3 points. What are we talking about as to why they were able to do that on Saturday? I'll start with you, Devon, then Manny.
And we touched on a little bit for sure. I actually feel that, I'm going to contradict myself a little bit what I said earlier. Actually, I actually feel like the ability of the speed.
Excited. I got him. I got his brain going. I like
Bingo.
it.
The ability of the two strikers here, specifically the speed, and what should be, in my opinion, a better pocket presence from Kelvin Yeboah against this team. The freedom that they should get Sporting Kansas City unlocks both A, space and behind. That bodes well for the two strikers, even if it's just one, depending on what it looks like at the point in time in the game. And down underneath, to me, there's a clear separation within the midfield ideas if they drop a double pivot or a single pivot of the space on either sides of that. And, you have a back line and a midfield that just don't seem to be on the same page right now. I really think it favors the strikers. I want to see a lot of other things within Minnesota United's system for sure, but the two strikers and maybe the lack of opportunities that they've been able to create so far, I like the way this sets up for them.
Manny?
I just think you said the word desperate. I'm not. It's only fourth game in, but I do think you play a little bit desperate when you're trying at home. For them, they look at it like a winnable game because they've had success over the years against us at home. I think the little things matter. So I think first and foremost, I think set pieces are going to play a huge role. First goal for me is a huge role because if we get the first goal, we kind of know how we've dealt with the adversity so far this year. If we don't, I think it's a new wave of of us, how are we going to kind of react to that? And how are we going to kind of react, whether it's the same system or do we change system? But I really like that. I think Robin Lode is still my secret player. I think he's still getting his fitness. He didn't have a great, like, normal preseason. He was out for a little bit, injured for a little bit. And I just think he's going to be a big piece of this game for us if we're going to be successful. If Joaquin Pereira comes back in, both of them together will be, but because that's where our creativity will come from. That's where the guy will kind of, will release Bongi if Bongi does able to get forward a little bit more, because I do see Tommy coming inside and being dangerous, but we've got a lot of guys inside. So there's a lot of good matchups there for us, hopefully, to deal with him. But it's a good one. Like I said, it's a fascinating game this weekend based off of how many numbers we throw and how early in the game do we say we're going to make it more wide open, or we still stay with how we played against San Jose.
Looking forward to it. That game coming up 7:15 on Saturday night, Apple TV Plus with Devon Kerr. He'll be on the call for that one. Boys, I know we got to get out of here really quickly, but I'm going to leave you with the most controversial question. Julian Alvarez, double touch or not? One word answer, go.
No. Man, you can't think that long and then definitively say yes.
It was not clear and obvious, but it's so Madrid. It's amazing. I was actually listening to it on XM on the way home from work, so I didn't actually see it, but it was unbelievable. That whole game was amazing. So I couldn't believe it.
Chris Whittingham doing play-by-play. Love the guy. He's one of my favorites to work with. Him seeing the replay and going, ooh. Like that to me. A guy who takes full pride in the full depth of what is the English language and Oxford Dictionary was kind of like just random noises, not knowing what was going on.
I honestly think, I think if you can actually double touch those shots, I think you should let it happen, because that's an amazing feat just in itself, like to do it. But anyways, yeah, it was probably not. I looked at it more again this week, and although some of the videos are slowed down so much, I'm like, are they manipulated now, or my brain can't count? Like it's hard, but yeah. Anyways, tough for Atletico Madrid there. Tough way to go out.
Certainly was a tough way to go out. Looking forward to this game coming up this weekend between Minnesota United and Sporting Kansas City, 7:15 p.m. Kickoff between those two sides on Apple TV, 7 p.m. pre-match show with Dan Terrar and myself on the radio side on 1500 ESPN, as well as on SiriusXM FC channel 157. Looking forward to the call there. Boys, appreciate you guys stopping by, and Devon, we'll appreciate and look forward to listening to your call this weekend.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me.
Loons fans will talk to you next week, previewing the Galaxy game coming up in next week at Allianz Field. Talk to you then.